Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. We're waking up with watches, and everything you see is for sale. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com with your questions about pricing, extra photos, accessories, and conditions. We are also always looking to build inventory. Trade us a watch or sell us a watch, or even an entire collection at once. No upper limit on value paid. To pursue a trade, a purchase, or a sale, reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's talk about something that has stirred controversy for nearly the entire new model year to date: the similarity between the Rolex Oyster Perpetual Cosmograph Daytona steel ceramic and the new 2021 Zenith Chronomaster Sport steel ceramic. As you could see, these watches very much cut from the same cloth and close in size, 40 millimeters versus 41, both with white lacquered dial bases and black ceramic bezels. You can even see that the design of the bracelets track fairly closely, and when we get to the clasps themselves, we're talking almost clones of each other. So let's talk a little bit about these two pieces, how they compare and how they are different. I think the first and most important comparison needs to be thickness. 13.8 for the Chronomaster, and then 12.2 for the Rolex. They're both 100 meters, though the Zenith has a push-down crown, and the Rolex is all about its screw-downs. Here we have a 72-hour power reserve with the Daytona, vertical clutch, column wheel, no display case back, and of course, it features a blue chroma-light lume. We have black registers on a white dial base with white gold hands and indices. They are rhodium-plated steel on the Daytona, or I should say the Chronomaster Sport. The Daytona here has a tachymeter scale on its bezel versus a striking tenth system for the Chronomaster Sport. That means you can more easily read fractions of a second as it breaks up 10 seconds and wraps at around 360 degrees of dial, making the spaces between the whole seconds larger and easier to read at a glance versus, for example, the hashes on a conventional seconds track. And since this is 8 beats per second, but this one is 10, it's even more important on the El Primero that you be able to view the fractions of seconds. Now, you do lose the chronograph hours register, but you gain a 60-minute register, which I find handier than the 30-minute register you're going to find on a standard chronograph, including the Daytona. I will say this: the Daytona's bracelet is better built, and there is a big price delta between these. This is $13,150 new, far more pre-owned, and this costs in full bracelet form $10,000 new. Pre-owned, this watch is going to sell for $10,000 to $11,000. This one's going to be $37,000 to $40,000. So while I do think the Daytona overall is probably a more solid product when you throw in the clasp, the power reserve of the movement, the quality of the bracelet, the thin profile of the case, I also think that the Zenith makes such a good play for value that, quite simply, it's the easy choice given the absurd prices of used Daytonas right now. And what you get is the El Primero 2, or it's effectively the El Primero 2. They call it caliber 3600. Power reserve goes from 50 to 60 hours. For the first time ever on an El Primero not called Dayfi El Primero 21, we have a hacking second system. Still a column wheel with a lateral clutch. The Daytona is column wheel with a vertical clutch. Between the two, the Daytona does have better pusher feel, but it is quite close. And as you can see, the El Primero caliber has a date, which makes it handy. The Daytona is clean, but it lacks that functionality. Let's do wrist shots with both of them and do it real quick so we can jump to the other exciting inventory. Now you can see internally there's this lift lock, this beacon hook. The clasp is made quite differently from the Zenith. There's the Easy Link 5mm adjustment system, and while there are divots drilled to the inside of the clasp so you can change the anchoring point of the bracelet, you can't see them straight through. They aren't drilled through the side of the clasp as they are on the Zenith Chronomaster Sport. Now taking a quick look at this watch on the wrist, you can see that it is low slung, close cut, and actually wears a little bit smaller than you might expect. Though it's a 40, it's nothing like a 40mm GMT. This watch feels more like a 38, and it's suited well to a smaller wrist. You can also see it's nice, flat, and flush, so easily sliding underneath the cuff. It is the consummate sports chronograph, but also a very viable dress chronograph. Taking a quick look at the Zenith, the Chronomaster Sport here is a much thicker watch, but it's almost the same measurement across the wrist from side to side. Pop open the clasp, you can see there's not as much going on here. This is like an Oyster clasp from the 90s, less like the modern Rolex clasp, more like the ones that you would have seen on 5-digit era Rolex Daytonas. You can see here there are several divots drilled in here, but we don't have a Easy Link style pullout system, and there is only one locking factor, the clamshell system. Throw it on the wrist. It feels good and it looks good. It is much thicker, and you can feel that immensely. The the height, the heaviness, the amount of metal here, it's something that's tangible, even eyes closed. But you can see it's not terribly broad across the wrist. They're almost the same across the wrist. So I'd recommend this watch for a 14 centimeter circumference wrist or larger. The Daytona, you could go a little bit smaller. Want to do a quick competitive lume shot? Why not? Here are the two side by side. I'm going to give the edge to the Daytona. The lume plots are larger and just a little bit brighter. Now let's bring in a star that represents fantastic value, made from 1998 to 2003. This is the IWC GST Alarm, reference 353701, 39.9 millimeters in titanium. This watch is one of the original examples from early in the build order. So 98.99, and you can see it features its original factory tritium dial. This is not Fotina. A lovely media blasted titanium finish. It's a handsome watch that offers tremendous discretion. It uses a JLC 918 automatic alarm caliber, so it is quite vocal when it needs to be. And you can see one of the innovations of the GST line was a modular bracelet for which every single link is removable. So you can absolutely size this one right down to the individual links, cut it down as much as you want, every link removes. Solid case back, early IWC fish style crown, and then of course you adjust the alarm. We may as well fire up the alarm. Hope I wound it. It is quite vocal. The timepiece, easy to wear, beautifully compact, and hugely water resistant. This is a swimmable 120 meter water resistant timepiece. Throw it on the wrist and it cuts a striking figure. It is not a big watch, nor is it excessively thick, and in titanium it's quite light, but it is the epitome of elegance. Few sports watches pull off dress attire with more panache and more of an air of natural agreement than this wonderful 3537 in total concert with an elegant attire. It's also a very sporty watch that remains viable as a sports watch to this day, and being late 90s IWC, it's from a different era before Georges Kern and before Richemont influence. This is IWC at its peak. You can even see the lovely old International Watch Co. logo vaulted across the top of the dial, a truly special piece. And again, this is a great way to get into vintage without worrying about the Franken watches and counterfeits of, for example, the Rolex vintage market. 90s IWC is where it's at. Now, fast forward just a little bit, and we can talk about one of the most intriguing integrated sports watches ever made. Integrated bracelet, full stainless steel, entirely hand-finished at Piaget. This is the Upstream Automatic, a model launched in 2001 and built through 2006. The timepiece is 33 millimeters wide, 40 millimeters lug to lug, 9.5 millimeters thick, and the idea was to have a beautifully finished steel sports watch for younger men. Piaget looking to bring in a different demographic than in the past. You can see that the dial detail is extraordinary. Huge plots of lume. You have a lovely vertically satin-grained anthracite dial. You have a date with a bidirectional, that is forward or backwards quick set, hacking seconds. Internally, Piaget manufactured caliber 504 automatic winding, 40-hour power reserve. And then the coolest feature of this watch is a clasp that is one and the same as the bezel structure. As a result, you have this wonderful symmetry of bracelet structure underneath that makes for outstanding comfort. And you can also see that the detailing is exquisite with facets and polish on the sides of these little satin finished steel hobnails. You can also see that all of the finishing done manually and the construction done right. The individual removable links are fixed by screws, not pins and sleeves. You can also see that with the clasp open, the Upstream nomenclature is visible on the flank of the case. You have a lovely faceted crown with faceted crown guards. Throw it on my wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference. And you can see how beautifully it wears. Now I've crimped the inventory tag we have on there, but we'll zoom out a little bit. And you can see just how well the watch wears. Let me remove that stupid tag because that's going to bug me. There we go. Now the watch is wonderfully low slung, so it's still a Piaget. It can be used as a dress watch, but this is a timepiece that features more hand finishing than you'll find on a Bulgari Octo Finissimo, on a Chopard Alpine Eagle, on even a Moser Streamliner. This case, this bracelet, this bezel, excruciatingly hand-finished in La Côte aux Fées, the home of Piaget, and of course it's Piaget's own movement inside. A lovely and unfortunately rather obscure high horology sports watch, but it's got an unforgettable loom shot, which we're going to show right now. As you can see, this is a no-holds-barred sporting timepiece, automatic, full steel, full bracelet, and very, very well loomed. If you want a handcrafted watch from a great high horology brand and a true manufacturer, this is a fantastic way to go. One of my favorites on today's show. Now, we also have a 2011 200-piece limited edition Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore Ginza 7 special series. This and its carbon fiber counterpart were launched out of Audemars Piguet's Ginza boutique in Japan as a benefit for relief regarding the 2011 tsunami in Japan. So both of these provided benefits to the Japanese Red Cross. There were two, one in steel, one in carbon. This is the steel model. So as you can see, it's the 42mm Royal Oak Offshore, a 7 with diamond studs. A little bit difficult to trace the origin of this nomenclature, but my theory is that the Ginza boutique opened in 2007, and I think that is what's being referenced here. You can see satin finished applique white gold Arabic numerals, white gold baton hands, and a lovely concentric pattern underneath the hour track. This is a highly bespoke dial. Taking a quick look at the case, 14.5 millimeters thick with a diver style strap as seen on a lot of the Scuba and Vempe models in the 2000s. Throw it on the wrist because it is 100 meters water resistant and strapped with rubber. You can go swimming with no hesitation. This summer, one of the ultimate ways to get into high horology sports watches is to grab a Royal Oak Offshore 42. They're more amenable to smaller wrists like mine, 16 centimeters, than you're going to find with the 43 or the 44 millimeter offshores. Comfortable, surprisingly thin, and of course powered by a manufacturer movement with a 50 to 55 hour power reserve. This watch is ready for action. A slightly different look with similar wrist stands, however. Here we have the 41mm Royal Oak Chronograph. So it's considerably thinner, but at 41mm with a broad stance across the wrist, it doesn't wear that much smaller. Yes, it's a bit more viable with a tight dress sleeve, but you could see on my wrist it's got the same footing and pretty much the same surface area as the 42. What it has is extra elegance though, and of course it is the original Royal Oak. As with the Piaget Upstream we just saw, excruciating levels of hand-finished detail, and that's what you're paying for when you get a Royal Oak. It has a competent Frédéric Piguet movement inside, but this watch is all about the metallurgy and the pantograph cut dial, cut on a 19th century mimicry engine, and then galvanized black, white gold hands, white gold indices, polished chapter rings for the 3 registers. The movement inside, a high horology integrated automatic chrono, vertical clutch, column wheel with wonderful column wheel pusher feel and action. Screw down crowns, screw down pushers, 50 meters water resistant. This one is surface swimmable, and as you can see, the metal is remarkably intact. Likely never refinished, as sharp as the day it left Les Brassus. And this is critical on Royal Oaks and Offshores because a big part of the energy invested and that for which you paid is the quality of the finish, the metal. The bracelet alone taking 9 to 11 hours to hand finish. Sticking with a full bracelet, but a slightly different price point, this is a neighbor of Audemars Piguet in the Vallée du Jeu, Locle. In 1958, it launched the Geophysic engineer's watch, effectively JLC's answer to the Patek Philippe A Magnetic, the Rolex Milgauss, the IWC Ingenieur, watches of that ilk. And for 2015, this model helps to revise the history of the Geophysic by creating a new chapter. This is the Geophysic Universal Time, True Beat Second, 41mm in stainless steel. We have lovely satin-finished metallic land masses and a Mercator projection of the Northern Hemisphere. You can see the meridian and the anti-meridian. There is a striped white and red line that runs through the two of them. And then the image of the oceans, it's actually a gradient blue lacquer. And back in 2015, JLC was ahead of the curve with gradient blue. That was not really a thing back then. It is now. Individual indices, applique satinated and polished, and the watch has a deadbeat second complication. It is a mechanical watch, and it has a method for setting the local time independently of the world time. What you do is you align the current hour with each city, 24 primary reference cities for 24 primary time zones. The little star lets you know you're looking at a time zone zone in which summer and winter time are observed. And then you have this 24-hour rotating chapter ring, half blue for nighttime, half silver for daytime, and you can see the color inverts. We have silver on blue and then blue on silver, and it is just a wonderful looking watch. After you align the hours correctly, you set the current minutes, and then you independently adjust your local time to reflect the time zone where you currently are. Now, this one is equipped with the unconventional and rarely seen full factory bracelet. Handsomely satinated and polished to create a contrast, it has a remarkably smart double folding quadruple trigger bracelet that has two 2.5 millimeter micro adjustments built in. So effectively you have 1/2 of Rolex Easy Link on each side, and those two micro adjustments allow you to take in or take out between 2.5 and 5 millimeters of total adjustability. The movement is impressive. This is the caliber 772 based on the Auto Tractor. You can see, like a Rolex movement, it has a free sprung balance with a full balance bridge. That makes it tough. It has the deadbeat system, 48-hour power reserve, unidirectional winding with ceramic bearings. And if you look closely, you can actually see the spring and secondary escapement that control the deadbeat second system on the dial side. The watch, I will show you how that works because I hacked the watch. You can see that in action, that deadbeat second system and its attendant spring. If you look carefully at the balance, you can see it is what they call the Gyro Lab balance, because it's based on the yoke style balance from the 2007 Extreme Lab 1. If you look carefully, you can see each side of the yoke. It's not a wheel. It's like a double-sided battle axe, but each side is the back-to-back JL logo that is the symbol of the company. And so you have a beautiful movement with fired blued screws, a combination of manual and mechanical finishing in a lovely sports watch with layers of complexity, real history behind it, and a great brand on its dial. This is truly one of the best you can buy in that price point. The timepiece wears well, though it is larger than you might expect, 41 millimeters, but it's 56 millimeters end link to end link. So I recommend this watch on the bracelet for a wrist that's at least 15 centimeters in circumference. It is quite thin and it slides underneath the cuff. Just a good looking piece, and it's surprisingly well loomed. As you can see, it's got more lume than you might first suspect from looking at the dial, as the indices themselves are almost invisible during the day. Sometimes bigger is better and biggest is best. If that's the case, you will be smitten by this 47 millimeter Panerai Luminor 1950 Submersible 3-day PAM 305. So it is the Luminor 1950 Submersible, 47 millimeters with that 1950 case profile we first saw on the 2002 PAM 127 and decades before that on the Panerai Combat Watch 6152. It's all in titanium here. We have a bezel with one of the best detents you will find on any dive watch, a huge loomed pearl, easy to line up with the minute hand. You have a matte black dial with applique polished indices, and then we have a function that allows you to jump time zones without actually stopping the watch. So you can move the hour hand independent of the seconds and the minutes, and then you could drive the date forward or backwards depending on whether you're traveling east or west. In spite of being a 300-meter diver, it does feature a display case back. It has a caliber P9000, 2 mainspring barrels, 3-day power reserve. You can see that this timepiece featuring a free sprung balance for shock tolerance, and then it's overall a pretty thick movement, which bodes well for its durability. This watch is part of the legendary series of Panerai Luminor watches, which are known for their lume. We'll take a look at that in a moment, but first note this lovely factory strap, vulcanized rubber, made in Italy. There are quick sets on the bottom that allow you to instantly release the retaining bar. So this is a quick release lug system that allows you to easily swap the strap out using the tools included with the watch. And of course, we have the Panerai crown guard with locking lever, a design icon. You already know who makes this watch. Just by looking at the crown guard, you know who makes this watch. That is the definition of iconic. And as I promised, real lume, all 3 hands. Visible, oversized, thoroughly loomed. Ulysse Nardin is a brand I love, and it's a brand that does not get hyped online. When you see these watches used, you're looking at high horology at a honest price point. This is the Michelangelo Ludovico Perpetual, a timepiece that was made in 250 pieces in white gold, and it features the Ludwig Oxlin designed bidirectional perpetual calendar. It is a chronometer, COSC certified, and it has a Flinke dial, so it is a blue translucent lacquer over a guilloche base. Now, the lovely color of that lacquer matched by the strap could almost overshadow the remarkable calendar system, which you will note can be set in both directions. Take a look at the month of May. See how I'm setting forward and backwards across months? Very few perpetual calendars can do this. This is one of the most user-friendly perpetual calendars you will encounter. Big date, day, month, even the year. And yes, remember, it's a chronometer. Underneath the caseback, Ulysse Nardin caliber 33, distantly Le Mans based, but customized and decorated in-house. A truly beautiful watch with a matching full white gold deploying clasp. This strap is rather stiff, so I'm going to do my best to show you how it looks, but you really have to size this one down and wear it sized to get the best impression of how it wears. I recommend it for a wrist of 15 centimeters circumference or larger. It's about 49.6 millimeters from lug to lug and 39 millimeters across from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. It has a 48-hour automatic winding power reserve. Now, if you want to go way up the tech tree at UN, in 2003, they released the minute repeater of alarm watches. This is the Sonata. It's an automatic winder, it's an alarm, and it's a dual time. In rose gold, this watch is 42 millimeters in diameter and just over 13 millimeters thick, so it's not as thick as you might suspect. The movement has over 100 joules. Now, if you want to hear, there are two different ways to set this watch. You are able, well, I'm going to get the hands out of the way first. Just get them out of the way altogether. It is illumined, by the way, despite being a Baroque dress watch. So you have this ability to set the watch in a 24-hour countdown or set it to a time of day. So for example, let's say I want to set to 12, for example, or let's say I want to set it in countdown mode. If you want to hear the alarm, just set the countdown mode to 0, which means 0 minutes until the alarm, and then turn it on. You'll note it has a minute repeater style centrifugal governor as well as circumferential gongs the way a minute repeater does. There's blued screws, fired blued screws, and Côte de Genève on the dial. It is a beautifully made watch inside and out and a landmark in mechanical engineering within the Swiss watch industry. Externally, it is all Ulysse Nardin, quite distinctive in its appearance and substantial on the wrist. That said, it's not particularly thick. Again, this is another watch that really needs to be sized up before you can get a true sense of how it wears. And I'm just holding the strap taut right here because I don't want to clamp it and diminish the quality of the product you get at home. But you can see it's not a huge watch. It's a big watch. It's a large watch. I would call it full-sized rather than oversized. And because it is fairly thin, these early models with solid caseback are thinner than the display caseback models. It will slide underneath the cuff, especially with that concave bezel profile. A GMT and an alarm with both time of day and countdown modes, plus an on-off adjustment. And I should mention we have a little bit of the perpetual here as the date is bidirectionally adjustable. Now, I'm fortunate today that I have two of the only bidirectionally adjustable perpetual calendars on my table. Right here we have the H. Moser & C Endeavor Perpetual Calendar in funky blue, 40.8 millimeters. This watch, as you can see, featuring a full deploying clasp, a rare accessory on a Moser watch. Matching the white gold composition of the case, this provides you with protection against accidental droppage. It is an option selected at the dealer, not standard fitment. So this is better than standard. The case is beautifully sculpted. Moser first machines and then hand finishes its cases. So these dramatic hollows with their mirrored inner surfaces, those can only be achieved by hand finishing. This is something most brands, which are just going to stamp their movements, cannot achieve. You can see that the bezel is all concave around, but it swells wider at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. We have a power reserve indicator on the dial, down and up. The watch is rated for 7 days, but in fact it will run for almost 9. We have, as I mentioned, a bidirectionally adjustable perpetual calendar system. Now you can see there's a little index underneath the hands, 12 hours, 12 months. So it is a month date perpetual calendar system. And you can see how it indicates, for example, the 6th and the 1st. So this is going to be June 1st. Turn it to June 11th. Now it's my birthday, but you have the ability to adjust forward or backwards. So unlike a conventional perpetual calendar, this one does not need to go back to the factory in the year 2100. Now we also have stop seconds or hacking if you wish to set the watch to the second. Turn it all over and you can see this is how it works as a perpetual. The leap year phase indicator is on the reverse side of the watch. Now Andreas Streller, who is a rock star AHCI rated independent watchmaker, he's a member at AHCI along with Dufour, Voutilainen, Journe. He designed this perpetual calendar system. Moser makes its own escapements, hairsprings, and balances, and here the escapement is 14 karat gold to operate with minimal lubrication. The hairspring is an overcoil shaped by hand. It is adjusted in 6 positions, one more than a standard chronometer, with golden chaton fixed by fixed by polished screws here, and fiery golden chaton with pivots at center in ruby. It is a colorful movement. You can see that the train, as well as the barrels, held in place by golden chaton fixed by screws. This is a nod to the pocket watch era of Moser manufacture. In the 19th century and early 20th century, you also have three-quarter style bridge architecture. Even though it is not three-quarter, it's broken up into segments for easier service. It reads as three-quarter. It's also fairly tough with a full balance bridge and a free spring index design, and then these lovely double-crested Côte de Genève that are distinctive of Moser. You can also see that the case-back crystal is cambered and shaped to better fit the wrist. This is something that is extraordinarily difficult and expensive to achieve, but Moser pinches no pennies with this, its flagship. And you have that fumé fade dial in what they call funky blue. That's a funky blue center fading to navy, almost black at the edge. A great watch from what I like to call the German-Swiss FP Journe. They make only 1,500 watches a year. Speaking of FP Journe, here's a model we don't see too often in the most contemporary size. This is the Octolune, 42 millimeters. It's the option case size, the larger of the two. It is made, of course, of white gold. We have a number of elements here that set it apart. As you can see, we have white gold numerals, applique. We have a polished steel bezel surrounding the time. We have a white gold matte finish dial base. It's media blasted. We have a moon phase that, along with the double-digit date, can be quick set. And then we have a power reserve indicator that indicates 120 hours of chronometric power reserve. But here's the deal. That is the power reserve for keeping the best time. Absolute power reserve is about 160 hours, so it will run for almost 7 days. Turn it all over. Inside the platinum case, underneath the white gold dial, you have an 18-karat rose gold movement. So the movement is made of gold, the dial is made of gold, the case is made of platinum. So as a 42 millimeter watch, eyes closed, you'd swear it's 45 or 46. It has a wonderfully reassuring heft and substance to it. You can tell where the money went, as I like to say. Now the strap, you will note, is a custom Parisian-made Jean Rousseau strap using calfskin on the bottom, but ostrich in anthracite on the top. A rich embellishment we often like to include on Journe watches because they make for such a handsome and complementary color scheme. The quality of the watch is undoubted, and all this achieved in a thin case with a domed bezel, so it will slide underneath the dress cuff. Now, it's about 51.7 millimeters lug to lug in the bigger case size, so I recommend these 42 millimeter FP Journe watches for watch platforms or wrists of 15 centimeters circumference. You know, I'm getting jaded when I think of a wrist as a watch platform, but I still love doing this, and watches like this are one of the reasons. One of the best independents in the business, and one of the most historically influential independents in the business. Journe making about 950 watches a year. Not far across Geneva, though, there is a company that makes only about 150 to 170 watches a year, 41 millimeters in 5 pieces, limited edition in rose gold. This is the Laurent Ferrier Galley Traveler Globe Night Blue for William & Son. It's a mouthful, but the Globe Night Blue for William & Son is a UK vendor special series watch that came out in 2016, and it builds on the Galley Traveler platform. Now, what we have here outboard is the Galley case, which is, as the name implies, designed to imply the shape of a pebble smoothed in a babbling brook or a stream over eons. It's a wonderful fluid and organic form, giving way to a dial that is composed principally of blue enamel. And then if you look carefully, you can see that England is a small piece of gold leaf. So there's a little bit of gold leaf embellishment on this night blue Galley Traveler Globe dial. It is enamel, and so the images of the landmass is built up using vitreous paint on an enamel base. A lovely satin track for the hours, assegai or spear style hands. You have a travel time system that allows you to set the local hour hand, and you can see local hours drive the date over at 3 o'clock. What appears to be a date of some kind at 9 o'clock is actually your travel time display. It's your second time zone in 24-hour format. Compared to something like a Patek Philippe 5231 or 5131, this is both more exclusive and more technically sophisticated, since the movement, the caliber 230, is based on the Gallet micro rotor with a jeweled staff pawl-based 22-karat guilloche cut mass underneath a black polished bridge, 6-position adjustment, a double direct impulse escapement modeled after the Breguet Natural escapement. We have 2 nickel phosphorus wheels that only impulse the balance in its direction of travel back or forth. There is no Swiss lever. This is a very sophisticated system that allows 80 hours of power reserve from a single mainspring barrel. It is free sprung. It has an overcoil hairspring. It is exceedingly accurate. And you could see that the size and quality of the bevels, among the best in the industry, comparable, in my experienced opinion, to the likes of Grubel Forsey and Fernand Berthoud. The only companies doing better in an obvious sense are the gods: Romain Gaultier, Carrie Vaudelin, and Philippe Dufour. This even merits comparison to those. Not clearly better, but a peer. The Côte de Genève are light, luminous, and broad. You can see there's a gradient from one side to the other. Laurent Ferrier is an établisseur, which means they take the best parts from the best suppliers, made to their specifications. They then finish them, regulate them, and assemble them. And there's a woman, Coralie Imberti, who works at Laurent Ferrier, who just does their in-house finishing all day long. Along with assembly and regulation, finishing is one of their in-house competencies. Now you can see there's a lot of black polish here. Every screw head, the bridge for the rotor, as well as the bridge for the balance. You can also see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sharp interior angles where beveled edges meet in a sharp cleft line. That is one of the most difficult arts of finishing you will find in the Swiss watch industry. This watch, with black polish and interior angles everywhere, is as good as it gets. You can see William & Son, and then this was a 5-piece limited edition, so exclusivity is assured. But let's say you want even more exclusivity. How about 150 watches a year from a company that has made fewer than 3,000 watches since its founding in 2002? This is the Bethune DB25 Starry Sky Moon Phase, or Moon Phase Starry Sky. Your preference, it matters not. 44 millimeters in white gold. This watch speaks for itself. Whatever nomenclature you could dream up, words fail to describe this fired blue titanium dial. Now, if you've ever seen oxidized titanium, you know that it's white. So this process to oxidize titanium and turn it blue is patented by de Bethune. The company has also patented its spherical moon phase. Now, you can see the moon phase is 1/2 blued steel and 1/2 white palladium. It has an adjustment interval of over 1,000 years. Small titanium cabochon outboard acting as the hour track, and then inboard you can see, among other things, the constellation Orion and the night sky, created by inserting small cabochon of white gold into minute drilled slots in the dial. So these are all applique white gold elements. The DB25 case is going to be preferable to those who like de Bethune engineering and exclusivity, but don't like the floating lugs of the 27, the 29, and the 28. And as you can see, these are conventional lugs, but open, airy, evacuated, and gossamer. The timepiece, featuring a relatively simple caseband, it is under 13 millimeters thick. It's broad, flat, and gorgeous. And on the reverse side, you can see the entire movement. It's steel plates, black polished with diamond paste. Manual wind, there's a power reserve indicator, twin self-adjusting barrels, all of this with a 6-day power reserve. Very impressive. Full balance bridge with 1, 2, 3 shock protection systems, and you can see this triple parachute shock protection system has a large black polished and laterally beveled spring structure over the barrel bridge. Patented twin self-adjusting barrels, patented triple parachute shock protection, patented bi-element flat hairspring that beats concentrically like an overcoil, patented the balance, a rim of white gold and a solid disc of silicon, and patented their own silicon escape wheel that increases power reserve as well as precision. This watch is the full package. Only a few dozen of any given reference made per year. This model is one of the most exclusive and the most scarcely seen. So this is a watch that you're rarely going to encounter even at high-end watch collector meets in big cities. De Bethune Bethune has always been an enthusiast brand for those who value engineering, beauty, and in-house competence. To Bethune not just patenting its own innovations and building its own movements, but making its own dials and crafting its own cases, and thus keeping pace with the very best full manufacturer independents like FP Journe that builds every part of the watch. That said, my favorite de Bethune is the DB28 Digital. 45 millimeters in grade 5 titanium, it's still only 12.9 millimeters thick. It features a guilloche dial that has a lovely grand orge or barleycorn pattern. This is cut on a rose lathe. We have that same fire bluing process for the titanium used to surround the moon phase at center. And you can see this too, 1/2 blued steel, 1/2 white palladium with a little white gold cabochon inserted to surround the moon. And then they also grace the minutes track at the top of the dial. We do have a jumping hour, and despite the fact that this is a power-intensive complication, this jump hour still has a 5-day power reserve. And you can see it's an absolute riot to play with this watch. Super intuitive to read, grade 5 titanium externally, meaning it's hypoallergenic, feather light, and almost impossible to scratch, as grade 5 tie is harder than 316 and 904L steel. Bullhead winder, screw down for security, variable geometry floating lugs. That feature helped the original DB28, the ancestor of this model, to win the GPHG Aiguille d'Or, or the Grand Prize, at the Oscars of Watchmaking back in 2011. Flip it over and you can see a distinctive finishing trait of de Bethune, which is Côte de Bethune. Lovely Côte de Genève, vertical stripes, but you can see that the gradient, the darker gradient, is outboard on both sides. Normally, it would be directional, and the gradient would all be justified to one side. But what they do is they split the bridge for the barrels, and they split the base plate, and they reverse the wheel that lays down the stripes so that the gradient faces outboard on both sides. We have satination for the wheels, including the barrels. The spring setup for the triple parachute is both blued and black polished, and you can see that the entire bridge has been black polished and fired blue. We have the same technical innovations that you saw before in the DB25, but here again we have the DB28 bullhead winding system and the spring-loaded lugs. While the watch is a 45, don't let that fool you. It's feather light and fits easily on a wrist. Being titanium, it is very hard to scratch, and being thinner than you'd expect, it's actually amenable to a dress cuff or a tight sleeve. This is my favorite de Bethune model, and I think it's the one that captures my imagination amongst all independent brand option. Only the FB1 at Chronometry Fernand Berthoud stands with this in stature in my mind. The kind of watch that makes me think what I could get for a spare organ, or perhaps the watch I could buy if I were to simply empty the tank and evacuate the bank account. This watch would be worth it. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com to make my dream come true for you. That is tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Time out, Tim out. Thanks for logging on.